Proverbs chapter number 6, and we'll begin our reading in verse number 6 and read all the way down to verse number 11. Certainly an interesting passage, one that I have heard for a number of years. Really haven't had the opportunity to study at length until earlier this week. And so Proverbs chapter number 6, and we'll give you all just another moment or two to find that there in your Bibles. So we know this is Solomon writing with the wisdom that God gave him. The earlier part of this chapter, verse number 1 through 5, he was writing to his son. We'll talk about that in a moment. But now in verse number 6, Solomon writes this. It says, "Go to the ant, thou sluggard." He doesn't really hide any punches, does he? He doesn't pull back. "Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man." Father, I thank you for what you're teaching me through your Spirit and through your word. I pray, Lord, that you would bless now this preaching time. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, I know last week we had the kids play, and so we weren't in Proverbs, but 2 weeks ago, we were just at the beginning of this chapter, and we were talking about how Solomon is instructing his son that if he had made a bad decision, that he was supposed to escape that snare with all of his might. And we realized that you would either give your attention to giving out of that snare, or it would be the ruin of you. And so in the context, he talked about someone that was a co-signer of a loan, though what the Bible calls a surety, if thou be surety for thy friend. But the application is any wrong decision that you've been lured into. I don't know about you. I've probably been lured into making more than one bad decision of my life. I was talking to the teenagers. I don't know why teenage guys do it, but maybe all teenagers do. How many of you have ever had hand sanitizer on your hand and lit that on fire? It's not a good idea, but teenagers do dumb things, especially teenage guys. And so I know that I've done that. I haven't got burnt yet. I think there's a Proverbs about that later on. But sometimes we get lured into doing dumb things. Other times we get lured into sin and into bad decisions. We find out here, what we saw was that ignorance is not the same thing as innocence, but there was still hope for the remedy, and this is key. If his son would act now, if he would realize the urgency of this decision. And I know that sometimes we understand that there's things that should be done right now. Just because we know that something should be done right now doesn't mean that we always act on those things with diligence and with the urgency that we should. So to teach the importance of prioritizing what is important, Solomon tells his son to go to the ant. You say, well, he didn't call him his son. He's calling him a sluggard. Now, it could just be to any lazy person in particular. Really, in reference to the chapter, he's talking to his son. And so look at these first 3 verses. "Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest." Now, a sluggard isn't really a word that we use very often nowadays, but it's one that is slothful, does not act upon urgency of a situation. So they're just one that maybe would be called a procrastinator, really in this context. But he says to go to the ant, thou sluggard. How many of you all have played with ants before? Whenever you were kids, maybe even recently. I don't know. I saw an ant this week and I stepped on it. That's not what the Bible tells the sluggard to do. He says to go to it. So I studied out ants a little bit. Right now, they know of 15,000 different species of ants around the world, and that number is growing all the time. But I didn't want to know about any ants or ants in general. There had to be a particular type of ant that they had there in Israel, and many commentators believe that they were dealing with, or Solomon was talking to, the harvester ant. Now, this is a very interesting, sophisticated ant, and they're incredible creations of God. Obviously, they're ginormous on the screen and terrifying when they're that large. But the ants in Israel, this harvester breed of ants, their colonies can reach up to 90,000 ants. All right, the queen lives anywhere from 15 to 25 years on average. Some queens will live up to 30 years. And I don't know how they know that besides just asking them, but somehow they've been able to figure that out. She's going to lay millions of eggs in her lifetime. Here's the thing about the queen ant. She does not control the colony. She's got a job, she's got a responsibility, but no one tells an ant where or how to work. Now, I think it's interesting, and we should look at how they work here in just a moment. Most ants will work outdoors, all right? So even in this harvester ant, they work outdoors for certain months of the year. A single ant can carry 10 to 50 times its body weight. I weigh right at 200 pounds right now, and so that would be like me carrying a 10,000-pound African bush elephant. I had a picture that I had AI made of me lifting an elephant, but it was dumb, so I didn't put it on the screen. You all wanted to see it. I'll show it to my kids later on. Joel doesn't have it, so there's no way to see it right now. But now listen, that's obviously a difficult thing for the ant to do. But you never hear of an ant complaining. In fact, of course you don't hear them speaking, but even if you can just observe their habits and their behavior, what they are, they don't complain, they don't procrastinate their work, rather they are diligent. Here's how Webster defines diligence. It's the steady application in business of any kind. Constant effort to accomplish what is undertaken. Exertion of body or mind without unnecessary delay or sloth. Due attention and industry. All of that has the idea of being diligent. And these ants, if they are anything, they are diligent. Here's what they do. When they go out and forage, they will use a sophisticated pheromone trail that they'll leave behind that will help other ants find seeds. And it's not just a path here and a path over there. These ants in particular, they make highways. Okay, and so if you think of a highway, you think of multiple lanes of traffic that cars go down. They have branches or arteries of highways that the ants will travel down, and then they'll go off and take an exit ramp off of that highway to go towards a particular vegetation. So they don't just go to the seed or the source of the food and carry it back to their nest. These ants will find vegetation sometimes 100 feet from their nest. They don't need the daylight to orientate. They have other ways of doing that by counting their steps, tracking angles of the turns, finding landmarks that help them navigate. And so they can navigate overcast, when it's overcast or underground. And once the food is gone, then they will close the trail up by not putting the pheromones down anymore. So what's most interesting about these particular ants is that they use relay stations. Okay? And so rather than take a leaf or a seed, is what these ants use, and go all the way back, carry the seed all the way back to the nest, they will bring it back to the exit ramp off of the highway that we talked about earlier, and they'll leave a cache or a pile of food there. And they'll go back and forth just to that one spot. Then there's other ants that will go from the nest to that relay spot and carry them back to the nest. It really is just incredible, and that prevents them from just bottlenecking there at the entrance of the nest all at once. It's fascinating. They gather millions of seed, and that's actually a way that they propagate. And sometimes it just gets too hot in Israel for these ants to work. And so if it gets to be over 90 degrees Fahrenheit, they will sleep during the daytime, but work all night long in the cool of the evening there. It's just They're so diligent there. Now, those are the ants that work outdoors, but there's also some that work underground. They dig tunnels. They can go several meters down into the earth, and the tunnels are for traffic, but they also have separate rooms in these tunnels. One of them is for the queen, where she's going to go and lay her eggs. Then they have another chamber for garbage disposal, like they have a trash room there, or like a mount of trash like we have over here off of Waverly. They have a place where they brood, or where they rear the brood and where they feed them. And this is interesting. They also have rooms in their colonies that are just for dry seed storage. All right, so there's a fascinating video on YouTube that goes and talks all about this, but it's a granary that these ants have inside their colony. Now, not only do they just put food in there, but they'll monitor temperature and humidity. And so if it gets too humid, these little seeds that they gather from around Israel, they'll start to sprout. And so if that starts to happen and if it gets too humid, they'll bring the seeds down to another area, another chamber within their colony nest, and they'll go and store that in another place for the whole winter time. So they anticipate the problems and they deal with the problems. They don't wait till the problems have just got out of hand. Another great thing about these ants is you would know from science of years gone by that they don't have teeth, they have mandibles, right? They have like giant scissor-like jaws there that they use. Now, they use those mandibles to transform their seeds into a paste that makes them easier to swallow, all right? And it goes from starch down to a glucose. So glucose is bread, right, and sugar. And so what they literally have in their stores during, if someone were able to excavate their colony, you would find bee bread. And so they take these seeds that they harvest, they chew them up, they store them, and then if an ant wants a snack, she would just suck on the edge of this crumb of bee bread that's been chewed up already, and that's how they survive. It's incredible. It's almost as cool as honeybees. Honeybees have an integrated system, and it's neat that we're just learning more and more about these ants. So they've got assigned jobs, but they can also switch jobs around based on the need. And if there's an abundance of seed, an indoor ant that's caring for the young, she'll go and start bringing in the seed from outside, from those cache piles where they leave the seeds there on their highways. So Solomon tells the sluggard, the man that's lazy here, to go to the ant, consider her ways, and be wise. That's a lot of information. It's a lot of work for an ant. But there's something we can learn from this, specifically in verse number 7, that she doesn't have a guide, an overseer, or a ruler. The ants have no leader. There's no boss ants that have a clipboard and tell the other ants to get to work. They just go to work by themselves. Kind of reminds us of the locust. The Bible says in Proverbs 30:27 that they have no king, yet go they forth, all of them by bands. You'll never find an ant like this, will you? One that's got a clipboard and says, now you go there, you get to work, you take care of the brood there. None of that happens because it uses its God-given instincts, right? It's God-given wisdom to work when it is harvest season. God gives us the same wisdom also. And no one should have to tell us what needs to be done today. But look at verse number 8. It says in Proverbs 6:8, having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. So, in Israel, I thought, well, I'm going to dig into that a little bit more. These ants, it ends up that they semi-hibernate from November to April, 5 months, where they're not totally asleep, but all they do is just eat their reserves that they have stored up from the summertime until the soil warms up in the springtime. When the soil warms up in April, that's Passover season in Israel. All right, so that's when the barley harvest will come in. And during the barley harvest, you'll see these harvester ants all over the place there, from what I understand, bringing back the seed to their nest. That lasts for a while, and then you've got several weeks later, you've got Pentecost. That's around the time of the wheat harvest. And so in time of harvest, the Bible says that she provides her meat in the summer and gathereth her food in the harvest. God provides food in the season, but they have to go out and get the food. If they're going to have food in their home, then they have to work during the harvest, right? So here's what we have to understand. That tomorrow's needs depend upon today's work. Tomorrow's needs depend upon today's work. In the text that we have, especially these last three verses, verse 9 through 11, it seems as if the morning has passed. There's a slothful man, maybe Solomon's son. He's still in his bed. And so Solomon has a question for his son. Look at verse number 9. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? You've seen this before, haven't you? Maybe you were here as a teenager. You're sleeping in, because all teens just have this need to sleep in. And someone's outside working. Maybe they're mowing the yard while it's still cool outside. Maybe they're building a fence, or in this day and time, they would have been out early in the morning harvesting the barley in April and harvesting the wheat later on in the summertime. And there's a son, there's a sluggard, there's a man. He might be a young man, he might be an older man, but he's still in bed. And the man, Solomon, is looking at the man and saying, how long are you going to be in here, in your bed? It's as if there's a little bit of hope, because the harvest isn't done yet. But if he isn't accountable, if he doesn't get up and out of bed, then there's going to be a certain outcome. He's going to be poor. He's going to be hungry. He's going to starve. This sluggard, though, didn't want to get out of bed. He wants a life, now get this, that is free from the inconvenience of having to give up on his sleep and get to work. He wants a life that is free of pain. So harvest time in the Bible, and we've looked at this before, but that would involve an incredible amount of grueling labor. When it was harvest time, that is all that you did with every waking hour. It was hard, and the sluggard would rather sleep than sweat. Now there's nothing wrong with sleep. The Bible talks about in Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 how that the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. But that's not the kind of sleep that this man has. So Solomon here in the rest of these verses, he predicts what kind of future the man will have that refuses to work, to get up and work. This man makes little surrenders to sleep, and little by little, day after day, morning after morning, the bounty of the harvest escapes him. He's not going to miss out just on the harvest, but he's going to miss out on the food, the necessities of his life. And he's going to become a beggar. Not someone that's unlucky, not someone that had a hard lot in life, although he might think that. The reason that he's going to become a beggar is because he is lazy. Look at verse number 11. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. One that traveleth. Okay, the idea here isn't someone that is on perpetual vacation, but the idea here is rather like a vagabond. Someone that doesn't have a home. And an armed man isn't a soldier. It's someone that's armed that's going to go attack somebody else for their food. Think of the men on the story of the Good Samaritan as the man was traveling down. Then there were the thieves that beat him up there, and if you would, at gunpoint, but they beat him up and they took all of his money. That's the kind of armed man that Solomon is referring to. And what he's saying is that though the diligent ant has plenty, the slothful man will have poverty because he's decided to rest instead of work. I think we see that here in the text, right? He's going to have poverty instead of plenty. Just as there is an urgency to escape, in these first 5 verses of Proverbs 6, for the son who's snared by his own words, so there is an urgency to work diligently like the ant during the summer harvest. Harvest doesn't last all year, Solomon is saying. So there comes a time when neither the ant nor the sluggard will be able to harvest. Difficult times are coming, and so here's what Solomon is saying. This man has to choose between a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, or between poverty. That phrase there, the folding of the hands to sleep, has the idea of either crossing your arms, because some will say the hand was kind of like from the wrist down in the Bible, or it's just that you're folding your hands like this. Either way, the principle is the same, that you've got no intention of working. Remember when you were learning how to play ball? Your dad or your mom or someone, maybe your coach, say, get your hands up all the time. Don't let your hands down. If you're out going for a pass, get your hands up, because you are intending to catch the football or the baseball or whatever football or whatever ball is coming at you here. The sluggard man, he's folding his hands. He's got no intentions of doing any work at all. You have to be self-motivated to diligently work before the harvest is ended. I think of Joseph in the Bible, right? You remember Joseph around Genesis 40 and 41. He understands by God's wisdom that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, and then there's 7 years of famine that are coming, when it's so bad, such as has never been seen before in Egypt. And so he uses God's wisdom and diligence, and he works in the time of harvest to save up for the time of famine, right? And they survive, and he saves his family alive, plus all of Egypt, and the government there ends up getting the advantage of that because of Joseph's wisdom. Think of Joseph in the Bible. What about your finances? We've done Financial Peace University here, and we know that there's an urgency to get out of debt and to build a fully funded emergency fund right now, not later. Because there's coming a time when you're going to need those finances, and a wise person will understand that they can choose between a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands where this is just not what I want to do right now, I need some personal time off. Or you can be diligent like the ant, and the difference is having food during the wintertime and having to beg and fight for your own food. Think about our health, like our physical health. The easiest time for you to get into shape is today. It's not tomorrow, right? And so there's going to come a time in our lives when you're not going to have the health that you enjoy today, and it's going to be more difficult to get yourself into shape tomorrow, right? And we're starting to learn that as I get closer to 40 in my own life. You think about your relationships in your families. Children are only young for a little while. And there's going to be a day that's coming when they're no longer as receptive to the influence that you have with them right now. And so it's easy as a parent to think that we need a little bit more rest, but we also have to understand that there's a window of opportunity that we have with our children that's closing and that we won't have after a time. So a wise person will understand that they must diligently work to love their children today, to lead their families in a walk with God today, because a day is coming when kids won't be sitting around your table. They won't be under your roof, and your opportunities of influence are going to be different. We think about the opportunities we have to share the gospel, to talk to people about the Lord. We never have another opportunity like what you have this week. I was found out about the news in Nepal today with the flash floods. How many of you all have seen the videos of that? It's just incredible. Entire towns was the headline getting wiped out, and it certainly looks like large swaths of a town, to say the least. Hundreds hundreds of people in the death toll already, and that's just early reporting. I remember getting a number of letters from different missionaries in Nepal, and so I did just a quick Gmail search of the emails that we have here at the office of those that have gone to Nepal or have spent any time with Nepal, and I came across a letter from the Unrus. And now, Nepal's nowhere near Sri Lanka. It's not like neighboring to it. There's quite a distance. But at one point, they had taken a mission trip, missionaries taken a mission trip from their church to Nepal. I don't know where they went in Nepal, but they had an opportunity there of a harvest that's no longer there for certain people and for certain towns. I think of what Jesus said when he healed the blind man in John 9. He says, I must work the work of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. God has given us today to work. John 4:35, Jesus is talking with his disciples and says, Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest? So this idea here, in my mind, that would tell me if harvest is in April time, it's in December right now. They wouldn't call it December, but it was December on their calendar, if it was a Gregorian calendar. And they're saying, look, there's a lot of time before we have to go out and labor with all of the context of this passage. But Jesus says, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest. What's God saying? Is that the harvest is today. The harvest is right now. And if an ant works diligently to harvest in summer because winter is coming, when they're going to be dependent upon the efforts of today, then the text forces us to ask this question, are we folding our hands for just a little more sleep? It's just a little decision. The guy doesn't say here, the sluggard doesn't say, forget about harvest today. I'm not going to go outside and all and work. No, he just says, a little sleep. Just a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And Solomon here tells us that the sluggard doesn't make a drastic decision never to get out and work again. He just makes a small decision. I don't have time to harvest today. I don't have an opportunity to share the gospel with someone. I don't have an opportunity or really a need to do this ministry or talk to this family member or to invest in this relationship. But Solomon tells us here with God's wisdom that so shall thy poverty come. What do you mean so? He's referring to just the little choices to put off work for a little bit more. So we're to diligently labor today because there will be a time when the harvest is ended. It's sobering to think of that in light of Nepal. Some people say that that was all triggered, and it's maybe too soon to know, by a series of earthquakes that happened there in the Chinese Nepal region. There's a lot of earthquakes that are happening now, more than typically would happen. I'm not saying that we can mark our calendar and say, now this is the time when Jesus will come back. But it's just a reminder, isn't it? That harvest season may not be around for as long as we think it's around. We're not always going to have the opportunity to work and labor for the Lord like we have right now. So identify with God's help. Well, we're saying, I just need a little bit more sleep. Just a little bit more slumber. We have an opportunity to pray, and we'll be talking about this more in September. 20 minutes, getting up 20 minutes early to spend time with the Lord in prayer. That's 2 hits of the snooze button, right? That's just a little sleep, a little slumber. It's not the time to sleep. It's the time to work.